We're going to be studying in the Gospel of Matthew tonight. We're going to start in the 23rd chapter as kind of a launching point, but I want to spend most of the time in the 25th chapter, where it talks about the three parables. They call it the trilogy of parables that Jesus uses to close out his public teaching ministry. And it has real significance because when you actually build in this great crescendo of tempo and volume, you want the very most important thing you have to say to be the last thing you have to say, so that people will hold on to that as the core of what you're really putting through. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, just to give you a real quick overview, as Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem in the triumphal entry, that's basically a coronation event. He's being recognized as the one who saves. Hosanna, we've been saved. He saves us. They decide they're going to trip him up. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, there's this whole series of people who come to him with trick questions. They tried everything they could think of to put him in a strange box that he had to answer something weird that they could use against him. And in every case, he quieted his critics. And finally, they just got scared of making themselves look more and more foolish, and they stopped. They just hung around and hoped to wait for him to say something. And then we come to the 23rd chapter of Matthew. And we are reaching the climax. We're reaching the point. Now, this chapter is called the Seven Woes. All right? I'm going to start in verse 13 because we don't have time to go through everything I have laid out for you. Verse 13, Matthew 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Verse 15, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Have Jesus standing in the middle of the temple courtyard and saying, woe to you, blind guides! You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he's bound by his oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And he goes on. Verse 23, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, your mint and your dill and your cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, such as justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs. Look beautiful on the outside, but in the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. And it doesn't smell too good either, by the way. I think that was left out. In the same way, on the outside you appear as people, as righteous, but in the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build the tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our forefathers, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are in fact the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the full measure of the sin of your forefathers. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Now, those are harsh words. I think he really sums up all the rest of his ministry in verses 45 of chapter 24. I think you're going to get this about as clear at 45, 24, 45. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants of his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware, and will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that didn't happen to me, but it's a friend of mine's story. I get the tapes from Dave Embrecht at the Napanee Missionary Church, and Dave's been sending them to me for years. I really appreciate them, and he's got one story. When he was growing up, one of his first jobs was to work in a shoe store. And when he was hired to work in the shoe store, the man who hired him to take care of the shoe business left him in charge, basically to do whatever thing needed to be done in the store without a lot of supervision. And one of the rules was that he had to run the wall every night before he left the store. And what that means is he had to go over the shoe store back in those days was all done in a showroom. And the showroom had these walls that were completely covered with stacks of boxes of all the different styles and all the different sizes. And when you walked in, you would look at the store, and you wouldn't see any vacancies. The goal was, if you walked in first thing in the morning, you would look at this perfectly prepared store that had every size and every style, and it was right there. Now, all the shoes were in the back of the storeroom, so it wasn't like that they couldn't go back there and get one. But it was to give the store the appearance of being a robust inventory of what was there. And you had to run the wall every night. So if you'd sold some shoes out of the inventory, and you pulled them out, you had them right there, and you took care of people, there were going to be several holes in the inventory. You had to run the wall. Now, when I worked in the shoe store back in Iowa, he also told me I had to vacuum the carpet so that nobody walked in the first thing in the morning, there was any crumbs on the carpet. So, from my vantage point, it was always running the carpet. For Dave, it was running a wall. Okay? And everything worked very well. It wasn't like it took a lot of time or anything, but you just had to walk back, a lot of running back and forth to the storeroom. And then one day, it was like, well, I've got something I have to do tonight. I'll come in early tomorrow morning. I'll run the wall first thing before I open the store. And came in, took care of it, no problem. The boss wasn't there. No, it worked out fine. And then another day, several weeks later, and I really don't want to run this wall tonight. I think I'll run it first thing in the morning, and then it'll be ready so that but the next morning, when he got in to run the wall, the door was unlocked. And the owner of the business was standing there looking at the holes in the inventory. Dave Embrecht tells that story with such power because you can just feel the humiliation he felt because he had compromised himself on what was supposed to be done. And he didn't do it. It wasn't that hard. It was what he agreed to when he was hired. It was a contract he had with his boss. And the boss didn't say either the last thing in the evening or the first thing in the morning. It was you run the wall every night before you close the door. And he was caught. Now, Jesus tells the same story in the 45th verse right there, chapter 24. The servant has been given a job to take care of the rest of the servants in the household. And when the master comes back, no matter what day of the week it is, if the rest of the household has been fed, cared for, not neglected, the master said, "You did good. You did well." If you didn't do it, you got punished. And the punishment was severe. Now, I want to share this with you because this is very, very important to me, because Jesus is not just a teacher, and he's not just a prophet, and he's not just a moral influence. He is the Son of Almighty God. And he wants us to agree and accept him not only as Savior and Lord, but on every level be our authority, our boss, our master, our employer, our Father. He wants us to accept being under the instructions, under the orders, the commander-in-chief. He wants us to accept being obedient to his command. And that really is the key from the 45th verse of chapter 24 all the way through to the end. The reason why I do this is because he is going to build one story on top of another, one level on top of another, one illustration on top of another. And each one is going to get stronger and more powerful, and each one is going to get more scary in one sense. And I want to prepare you because it's going to start out kind of easy. All right, look over to chapter 25. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Have you ever heard that story? Fairly familiar. It's a wonderful story about a bridegroom who comes into town at an unexpected time, and there's a wedding feast. What we don't really get, because of the cultural differences between their culture and ours, is what he asked these 10 girls to do was the same thing they were asked to do every night of the week. There was nothing unusual in what these 10 young maidens were asked to do. There's no condemnation because they went to sleep. Staying awake was not the issue. It was only that they kept their lamps lit. All right? Now, many, many years ago, when I was running the Bible school program, I was the potter. And we'd throw pots on the wheel, and we'd turn them, and we'd make these little lamps like they used in the households in Jesus' day. And they were about the size of a large coffee cup, except instead of having straight sides, they were laid open this way. And there was a little groove at one side where they kind of were pushed together, and they'd lay a little string or thread up in that groove, and fill the cup of that with a little oil, olive oil or something like that, and light the end of the string, which would be the wick, and that would keep the light on, the fire alive in the home through the night. Now, we don't think about that because we just go to the switch and we turn the light on and it's always there and it's ready to go. But somebody had to keep the fire going in their household. Why? Because they didn't have self-lighting pilot lights. That fire, that little flame in that little cup was the only thing they were going to start the fire for breakfast in the morning, and it was the only thing that gave light through the night, and it was the only thing they could use to keep their household functioning. And so as you got to a certain age, and the girls were usually the ones given the responsibility, it was given to the young ladies the job of keeping the lamps lit. So every night, before everybody went to bed, the young lady, before she went, laid down on her bed, made sure that there was enough oil in the lamp and enough oil in reserve so that if something happened through the night, she got up and the oil was down just a little bit, there was enough there to refill the oil in the lamp. And they would slide the wick way down low so that it was just kind of a glowing ember thing. They didn't burn a lot of fuel when it was pushed down in there real close to the surface of the oil, and it just kind of simmered there real low. Well, in this story, the lamps are out, they're waiting for the bridegroom, so they've got it pulled up real big and they're burning a lot of oil. But the story is a very simple one. What he's saying to these young ladies is, do what you're supposed to do. It's not that hard. It's not that extraordinary. I gave you a responsibility. It is your responsibility to make sure that the lights stay lit. We don't have to go next door to the neighbors to try and say, can we get our light real lit from you? And we have to light our candle from your candle and back and forth and do all the hassle, because it kind of is embarrassing, and we're supposed to keep our own responsibility for our own fires and that kind of stuff. So cooking fires and everything needed to have someone tend them. It's not that hard. Just don't let the light go out. So when they ran off in the middle of the night to get more oil, they hadn't done what they were supposed to do. Just like my friend Dave leaving holes in the inventory in the shoe store. They got caught. The first level, the first step, is a simple one. You're a member of a family. You have the family responsibility. It's your normal routine. You are a daughter. Your mother and father are the ones who give you that responsibility, and they hold you accountable. You have a role within the society, within your particular family. And so if you want to have the recognition and the approval that you've done a good job, then you have to do what you've been given to do. You have to surrender your will to say, I am so sleepy, I'm not going to fill the oil tonight. No. Unacceptable. Wrong answer. The light's about ready to go out, and you're responsible to keep it lit. Okay. So, while that story has resonated through the years where people, well, the bridegroom came and they went in and, yeah, they got stuck. They're on the outside. But the thing that you have to remember is they shouldn't have had that problem, because what they were asked to do was not that hard. Okay, now let's jump to the second one. Now we take a higher step. It's up on a more intense level. We go to the parable of the talents. I'm going to do something just a little different with you tonight. Talents is a little hard for people to get a hold of because we think of it as being money, and there is a monetary value to a talent. You know, we know how much that is. But I've heard a lot of people say, boy, I'm sure glad he didn't give me any talents or money because I'm a poor investment counselor and all that kind of stuff. Really, it wasn't that kind of an arrangement. It was more, you are a servant in the household of a master. All right? He has given you work to do. The talents he's giving you are the resources you need to do your job. All right? And so if you're given a very big responsibility, you have to have a few more resources because you're going to be taking care of all the rest of the servants in the household. But in exchange, you've got yourself, you're the master servant. You're the master's servant. And you have a place to live, you have a place to take care of things, you have your family taken care of, the master takes care of you, and in response, you are to do the job he's given you to do. All right? And if you happen to have a smaller job, let's say you're just the gardener, then you don't have to have so many resources, and so he gave that particular servant fewer talents that he needed. It's easier to think for us, because of our cultural difference, to being like it's your job within the household of the master, and he gives you the resources to do the job that he's given you to do. Now, the guy that was given just one talent didn't have a whole lot to accomplish. Maybe he was just a janitor. Maybe he was just the one who helped around the house once in a while. He didn't have a lot to do, and so he didn't get a lot of resources to do the job he was given. But what did he get in exchange? Place to live, take care of his family, food, responsibility. He was taken care of. He's a servant of the master's household. Okay? And so when the master goes away, he says, here, I'm going to give you what you need to do the work that I've given you to do. And so they come back and they say, okay, here's what we did. We accomplished the task you gave us to do. Here's what you gave us the responsibility to handle. And he rewards each one. And it was given the 5 talents, comes back and says, here, I've got 5 more. That's where we get the idea that we're supposed to return money. Basically, we say, I did the job you gave me to do. The man who had 2 came back and says, here, I've done the job. Listen to what he says when the man comes who has the 1. Then this is verse 24. Then the man who had received 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Where's the problem in that? He points to his master and says, you take advantage of people. You use people for your own purposes. You didn't plant that seed, but you get the harvest. You didn't do anything, but you get the benefit. So you are using people to your benefit. You're a hard man. The master turns to him and said, you ate at my table every night. You and your family had a place to live. You were taken care of all the time I was gone. And you didn't do what I gave you to do. Who used people? You see, you didn't do what I asked you to do. And yet you got all the benefits of being my servant. You stole your life from me. Like you're accusing me of stealing things from someone else. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You see, on the story of the talents, the job was not that hard. He didn't give them something extraordinary to do, something terribly very difficult to do. He gave them the same responsibilities they'd had before. And he gave them the resources to do it. When they came back, those that had been found faithful, like the people who ran the wall every night, or like me, when I vacuumed the floor every night, and I got caught too. I waited until the next morning. There must be something about the shoe business or something. I don't know.
And put your heart and soul in.
I was a real heel. I got caught. It's not fun when you have such a simple thing to do. And the guy who had the least responsibility should have been able to take care of it easily without any kind of sweat, should have had no difficulty at all going back and say, I was there every time someone called on me. I was ready to go. But instead, you wicked, lazy servant. You took everything that was coming to you and gave nothing in return. Now it's all going to be taken away from you. The reason why it's a step up is this is a master-servant relationship. It's different than just being a girl in the household, mother and father relationship. This is a very intense relationship where you've made covenant contract relationships between yourself and the homeowner. You promise to do it. It's your responsibility. And so it's one more step up in intensity. All right? Now we're going to take the next step. We're going to jump to verse 31, the sheep and the goats. All right? In the story of the sheep and the goats, it starts out with it. I want to start reading in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he sits on the throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him and will separate the people one from another, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll put the sheep on the right and the goats on the left. Now, we started off with being a daughter in a household. And then we jumped up to being a servant in the household and the employee of his master. Now, we're going to go to the top step. This is as intense as it can get. This is the judge over all the people in every nation. He's going to draw all the nations together. He's sitting on the heavenly throne at the very pinnacle of heaven itself. And he's going to look at all the people down below his throne, and he's going to make the judgment of how you perform. All right? We start down here with just that normal kind of responsibility. We go to your career choice, your income, the way you took care of your family. And now we're going to go up to how you took care of your responsibility as you stand before the very Son of the living God, who's going to judge the living and the dead. And what does he say? Did you do what I asked you to do? It wasn't that hard. Did he say don't lie? No. There's nothing in there about don't lie. Did he say don't kill? No. Nothing in there about killing or adultery or anything like that. What was the job they were given to do? It wasn't that hard. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. Yeah, that's normal, right? If I was hungry, you gave me something. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. We have it all the time. It's not that hard. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. You let me get off the street. You protected me from, overnight. You gave me a chance to get in out of the rain. Not that tough. I needed clothes, and you provided some for me. Okay? I was sick, and you looked after me. Who wouldn't? I was in prison, and you came to visit me. These are the things that normal people do. It's not that hard. Then why didn't they do it? Because they were too busy living their lives for themselves. Now, if you go back over the woes, all right, the ones that were the snakes, the vipers, the ones who were doomed to hell, the ones who were going to be punished, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Look at what they were accused of. The first woe in verse 13, 23. They were elitist. They wanted to claim they were the leaders. They were the bosses. They were the ones who put themselves in position of importance. In personality screening, we call that self-aggrandizement. It means puffing yourself up to somebody who's something. All right? Doesn't sound like a terrible sin to me. There's no murder, there's no blood on the ground or anything. It's just They thought a lot of themselves, had a lot of pride. The second woe, verse 15, they made poor role models. That's a mortal sin? Being a poor role model? The third woe, verse 16, they trivialized the rules to excuse themselves so they didn't have to obey them. If you worked for a lawyer one time, and he was a great teacher, he said every single piece of paper has two sides. And if you look at it on the one side, you say, well, but all you have to do is turn it over and you can see the other side. If you look at any rule long enough, you say, well, I'm not really breaking the law if I see that I'm doing other things. And if you look at what the scribes and the Pharisees were doing, they were excusing themselves from having to tell the truth, be honest, be straightforward, be faithful, be merciful. They had some rules they were supposed to live by to take care of things. But if they just kind of split the hair just right, they didn't have to live up to the letter of the law. They could get by with sort of the intention of it all. The fourth woe, verse 23, there was a lacking of mercy. They didn't really feel like justice was important for everybody. It was important that they got justice, but not everybody had to stand up and take care of the injustices around them. The fifth woe, verse 25, they were glad to grab what they needed and what they wanted in a kind of selfish way, but there was no intention of sacrificing anything. No willingness to give until it hurt. The sixth woe, verse 27, they didn't have integrity. They weren't genuine. Their faithfulness lacked. They put on a display, but it wasn't what was really inside of them. This thing hit home one time when I was listening to a pastor's conference, and a couple of pastors were laughing. And then I realized they were actually bragging about being dishonest. They lacked integrity. I found out later that was true. The seventh woe, verse 29. They lacked humility. You see, they wanted to be the boss. They wanted to be the master. They wanted to be the guy in charge. And not like the daughter who had the responsibility to her family, or like the servant who had the responsibility to the master, or the subjects of the king who wanted to follow the king's orders. They wanted to be the king. They wanted to be the boss. And because they lacked humility, they failed to realize they weren't doing their jobs just because they wanted other people to do it. They wanted to delegate that responsibility to somebody else. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells a story of a rich man and Lazarus. Church tradition calls the guy, the rich man, Dives. What was his reason for being condemned into Gehenna? You remember? When he died, he ended up in Gehenna. Do you remember what? He just didn't care. He just didn't care. And there was somebody who was in desperate need, who had become so common, had become so ordinary, and it had become so easy to just walk by and not pay attention. He just lived his life. He just did what he was supposed to do. In that case, he was the man with the simplest of all responsibilities to do, who just lived his life and didn't do what he was supposed to do, and got caught. When the king came and the judge was sitting on the throne, the judge looked at Dives and said, "Did you take care of your friend and your brother that was out on the street?" My brother, I got several brothers, but none of them were on the street. Yeah, there was. Your brother, remember now, I'm taking the story as though you've already remembered it. He's calling on Abraham to send someone to send Lazarus back from the dead so that his brothers can be protected and not have to come into the place of torment and weeping and gnashing of teeth. His brothers lived in nice houses up on the hill just like he did. No. The king says it was the one who was laying there with the dogs licking his wounds who's your brother. And you let him lay there. Well, I didn't want him in the house. He didn't smell good. And then the flies and the stuff, you you can't expose your family to all of that embarrassment and all that. We have a nice house, and he'd stain the rug. Okay, you got a clean rug, but you spend eternity in Gehenna. Which do you want? You see, Jesus is trying to tell his followers, I came to do what my Father gave me to do. Miracles weren't hard work. They were just what he gave me to do. Teaching wasn't hard work. It was just what he gave me to do. My words were what he gave me to share with you so that you could know what the truth is. I did my job. I did what my Father asked me to do. Now I say to you, as your master, as your leader, as your teacher, and finally, even as your king and as your judge, just do what I've given you to do. It isn't that hard. It's not that much to expect. It's not turning you into somebody you're not. Just take it seriously. As a member of my family, as a member of my community, as a member of my society, as a member of my kingdom, do what everybody is supposed to do. Bob, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a grandpa, you're a friend, you're a neighbor, you're an employee. Do what I've given you to do with gentleness, with patience, with mercy, with a sense of justice and fairness, being transparent all the way through, not one thing one day and one other thing another day. Be the same all the time. Be faithful. Not that hard.